Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm yet to do a frontline update for today. I didn't do one yesterday either, just really struggling for time at the moment. I will see what I can do. I did want to talk about a few things that I've been waiting to speak about for some time. This is one of them. This was written, when was it? February the 1st, so 3 days ago. This is in the context of all of the rumors flying around whether Zaluzhny is going to be dismissed or not by Zelensky. I think it's pretty much accepted in most circles now that this is what Zelensky was going to do, and he still may do it. There's a lot of kickback. There's some rumors saying that actually Zelensky's walked back from that decision because of the pushback to the idea of him getting rid of Zaluzhny. A lot of Zaluzhny supporters, he's actually more popular than Zelensky. There must be something going on here. There are those who say actually Zaluzhny, as much as people like him and he's well revered and the troops like him, you know, the counteroffensive didn't go as successfully as people were expecting, and he was one of those who was expecting it to go well. And in fact, he admitted that his calculation of 30 kilometers in a day and the idea that the Russians would capitulate was wrong. And of course, that was crucial. I mean, that is basically your garbage in, garbage out type base. You know, that's what you're putting into your function machine to get your conclusions out. And that is a very costly miscalculation, I'd have to say. So, you know, you could produce some rationale to say, actually, you know, things didn't go as well as were expected, and that lays the buck stops with him in that respect. Others, on the other hand, will say, no, he's brilliant. If it wasn't for him, X, Y, and Z, he's been behind all the success of the Ukrainians, so on and so forth. So there will be fights. I'm not, to be honest, my previous video on this topic, explicitly on this topic, was one that was like, we can't see behind the scenes here. We don't know what Zaluzhny is really like in decision making. We don't know what Zelensky is really like in the interaction with the military leader. We don't know whether Zelensky gets too involved as a politician in military affairs, or whether the military man Zaluzhny gets too involved in political affairs. And so, you know, there could be some really good rationale either way on this. We just don't know. So what happens is we start making decisions based on, I really like Zaluzhny. I like how he carries himself. I like what he wears. I like how he appears. All this kind of stuff. And so we build up these opinions of people based on the wrong kind of data. So, I really like Zaluzhny. He's got a really nice face. Like literally, these are things that go through my. Why do I like Zaluzhny? Because he's been wearing patches with the, you know, Mandalorian patches with like Baby Yoda or whatever. You know, he's got that like real life appeal. That sort of, he seems like a nice person. To have made really good decisions. He's been lauded as, you know, the person behind the successes that the Ukrainians have had. Well, okay, well, if he's the guy behind the successes he's had, should he also not be the guy behind the failures that Ukraine have had? And okay, where does that leave our evaluation of him? I want to make sure that I'm using the correct inputs to bring about the correct output by conclusion about Zaluzhny. And then I'm not judging it on biases that are just sitting there, or variables that are not important to the actual calculation. And I think we all need to be aware of that. So there's a lot of knee-jerk defense of Zaluzhny, but I'm always interested. Okay, well, why do you think he's X, Y, and Z, and what are your conclusions that he's a masterful military genius? What are they based on? Is this coming from general media sources that aren't necessarily too connected to the actual data down at the base, or is he genuinely someone who's made some brilliant military decisions and will go down in history as this great military leader? Again, I don't know. I literally don't know. So I'm not sure how I feel about this, and I'm kind of just going along with it. Just fairly sure that both people will have, you know, their own opinions on these things, justified by their own like knowledge and in line with their own agendas. So anyway, he wrote a piece in CNN probably before the rumors started coming about, which then came about as the rumors are coming about. So, you know, this isn't, I don't think, in reaction to what Zelensky may or may not do. But it's about how the Ukrainian war doctrine needs to be changed in line with where we're at, modern warfare, so on and so forth. So just a few things I've highlighted here from Zaluzhny. Firstly, and he's talked about this previously in The Economist, by technological process which determines the development of weapons and equipment. So these are the challenges and how it needs to be shaped. Secondly, by political conditions at home and abroad and the economic environment. Well known that by now the central driver of this war is the development of unmanned weapons systems. Interesting that so explicitly stated here the importance of drones in the maritime context, the aerial context, and on ground even. They are proliferating at a breathtaking pace, and the scope of their applications grows even wider. Crucially, it is these unmanned systems, such as drones, along with other types of advanced weapons, that provide the best way for Ukraine to avoid being drawn into a positional war where we do not possess the advantage. I don't have the advantage of ammunition pieces and artillery pieces, artillery ammunition, and personnel. And so positional warfare is not good for Ukraine. It's exactly what Russia wants and what they were kind of banking on. But while mastery, it continues, of such technologies is key, it's not the only factor influencing current strategy. We must contend with a reduction in military support from key allies grappling with their own political tensions. The US. Our partners' stocks of missiles, air defense interceptors, and ammunition for artillery is becoming exhausted due to the intensity of hostilities in Ukraine, but also from a global shortage of propellant charges. Russia, taking note of how developments in the Middle East have distracted international attention, might seek to provoke further conflicts elsewhere. The weakness of the international sanctions regime means Russia, in partnership with certain others, is still able to deploy its military-industrial complex in pursuit of a war of attrition against us. We must acknowledge the significant advantage enjoyed by the enemy in mobilizing human resources, and how that compares with the inability of state institutions in Ukraine to improve the manpower levels of our armed forces without the use of unpopular measures. This is not even a veiled attack. I mean, this is a kind of open attack on Zelensky and the, I guess, Verkhovna Rada as well, in not producing legislation for mass mobilization of Ukrainians. He wants 450 to 500,000 Ukrainians mobilized. Zelensky's like, that's going to absolutely kill the economy and we'll get lots of people running away. That is not as easy as you think. And this is a huge tension because they do need troops. They do need boots on the ground. But troops and boots on the ground will kill the economy. It is a classic dilemma. I mean, it's a real difficult one. And, there are arguments for both sides there. He's very overt here in laying, however, the blame for the lack of mobilization essentially at Zelensky's feet. As he says, the inability of state institutions in Ukraine to improve the manpower levels of our armed forces without the use of unpopular measures. In other words, you've got to make these unpopular decisions, otherwise we ain't going to win the war. And Zelensky will be afraid to make an unpopular decision. He will be afraid to have his own popularity ratings plummet as a result of effectively forcing people to go and fight in the front lines. Finally, says Zaluzhny, we remain hamstrung by the imperfections of the regulatory framework in our country, as well as the partial monopolization of the defense industry. These lead to production bottlenecks in ammunition, for instance, which further deepen Ukraine's dependence on its allies for supplies. And this is a concern that has been bubbling in the background for a long time. There was I read to you serialized a very interesting Euromaidan press article by British General Grant, who was talking about all the issues with the Ukrainian war machine, if you like, and one of them was the difficulty to mobilize private industry to assist, and the regulations and bureaucracy that is a kind of a bit of a leftover from the Soviet era. Well, this I think has been largely improved. In fact, there's lots of people talking about how Ukrainian production of drones has a great advantage over the Russians in terms of the utilization of the private sector in concert with the public sector. So I think Ukraine has moved leaps and bounds in this area, but there's obviously still work to do in that area. The article, I mean, there's lots more in this article to focus on. I'm going to just join it a little bit later. It says, in short, this means that nothing less than the wholesale redesign of battlefield operations and the abandoning of outdated stereotypical thinking. New operations might include digital field creation, radio electronic environment control, or a combined operation using attack drones and cyber assets. Such operations will be coordinated and conducted under a single concept and plan. Crucially, the aim will not always be solely combat in focus. It might seek to reduce the economic capabilities of the enemy or to isolate or wear him down. So this is concerning attacks within Russia, hitting, I don't know, the economic system, hydrocarbons, but playing with, obviously talking about cyber warfare there in unison with other maybe drone attacks on actual infrastructure. So yeah, this is where Zaluzhny is going. So we are probably not going to win a war on the battlefield if it's just positional, a grinding, attritional war. We need to win the war in other ways. He said attack operations can have psychological objectives. That said, for the time being, the priority remains improving the situation on the battlefield. And here, technology boasts an undoubted superiority over tradition. The remote control of these assets means fewer soldiers in harm's way, thus reducing the level of human losses. Exactly what I've been talking about, which is Ukraine needs to be hitting with missiles, drones, distance standoff munitions, where they have an advantage over the Russians, both in terms of intelligence gathering to acquire the targets in a more time-sensitive, much more effective way. And then once you have those targets acquired, hit them with all of these great munitions that are technologically more advanced than what Russia has in some ways. And you know, it actually he talks in here about intelligence gathering as well, by the way, but I haven't included that in my highlights. It is to create a completely new state system of technological rearmament. Taking everything into account at this moment, we think the creation of such a system could be achieved in 5 months. Our partners are of the same view. In conclusion, in 2024, we must focus on our main efforts in 3 areas. 1, creating a system to provide our armed forces with high-tech assets, introducing a new philosophy of training and warfare which takes into account restrictions in assets and how they can be deployed, and 3, mastering new combat capabilities as soon as possible. We already possess capabilities to eliminate the enemy and ensure the existence of statehood. Our main goal must be to seize the moment, to maximize our accumulation of the latest combat capabilities, which will allow us to commit fewer resources to inflicting maximum damage on the enemy, to end the aggression and protect Ukraine from it in the future. So those are his opinions on where Ukraine needs to go with regard to redesigning its doctrine and kind of the army and how it works in unison with all these different components of the state. Mick Ryan, the retired Australian general, talks about the Zaluzhny-Zelensky issue. This is a few days old, mind. In fact, this is 4 days old, but I just thought I'd pop into what he had to say about the rumours that were swirling. Past 48 hours have seen much speculation about President Zelensky having decided to remove Zaluzhny from his appointment of Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Of course, this is not a new story, but what might be the implications? The tensions in this relationship have been apparent for some time. During my first 2023 visit to Ukraine early last year, I was informed that Zaluzhny had been forbidden from speaking to the press without presidential approval. The lack of success in 2023 counteroffensive, the interview by General Zaluzhny in The Economist in late 2023, and perceptions about the presidential aspirations all appear to have built to a crescendo in the past few days. It should be stated up front that in peace and war, tensions are always present in civil-military relationships. There is sufficient modern scholarship on this topic that demonstrates this, but in democracies it is an unequal dialogue. The civilian leader has primacy. If Zaluzhny is removed, again not confirmed, there would be many examinations of the wreckage that got us to this point. This is not my intent here. My focus instead is on the key impacts of a possible Zaluzhny dismissal. I believe there are 6. Impact 1. Commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Zaluzhny has been a charismatic and popular leader who prepared in the weeks before the Russian large-scale invasion. He is also an intellectual leader, having written 2 influential articles on the trajectory of the war and Ukraine's strategy. He also cares deeply for the lives of his troops and is not an overtly political general. This is not a common combination. It is what sets Zaluzhny apart from his peers. This mix of professional competence, delegation, moral courage, intellectual humility, and curiosity are vital strategic leadership traits and will be hard to replace. Impact 2. Successive changes down the chain. As Zaluzhny removal would assume that a suitable replacement is found, but in every high-level appointment there are successive moves of personnel well down the chain of command. This will be a little disruptive, but it is also what military organizations are designed for. Any change in the commander-in-chief will also change the fortunes of many other senior military leaders. Some will rise, and some who were previously on the rise will stagnate. Impact 3. Advice to the president. A key role in the command and control, or C&C, is military. Pretty sure that's C&C. A key role of the C&C is military advice to the president. Oh, commander-in-chief, sorry. This will obviously change with a new C&C. Given Zaluzhny's experience as commander-in-chief in this war and qualities described above, it will take time for the new C&C to settle in. Impact 4. Relationships with allies and security partners. While the defense minister is a primary interlocutor with foreign nations on military assistance, this is based on Zaluzhny's priorities. The C&C maintains close links with the US and NATO military chiefs. These would have to be re-established if a new C&C takes over. This would take time, but would be facilitated by the enormous goodwill towards Ukraine among NATO military institutions and leaders. Impact 5. Perceptions of government instability. This is a danger area for Zelensky. I'd agree with this, definitely. I'd agree with all of these points, of course. There may be some, particularly in the US Congress, who could use a chance in the C&C and the public fallout afterwards as additional evidence for why they shouldn't support Ukraine. As such, a government narrative and information strategy in the wake of any removal of the C&C would be vital to get right. Impact 6. Russian info operations. The Russian president is acting as if he is on the road to victory. This is a deliberate strategy to influence US Congress members and other politicians around the world. The Russian victory is inevitable and support for Ukraine is wasted. Any removal of Zaluzhny would play into this Russian strategic narrative, while the removal of the C&C is a prerogative of a civilian leader in any democracy. It will still come with political and strategic information costs. Impact 7. The future of Zaluzhny. The current C&C won't disappear if he's sacked by Zelensky. While it has been reported that he has been offered alternative national security appointments, finding the right appointment for Zaluzhny will be difficult. He has experience, stature, networks, and leadership skills that will be difficult to reconcile with staff appointments. My sense, however, is that while Zaluzhny will not want to go, he is also first and foremost a soldier and servant to his country. It is very likely that he will not want to make the war effort more difficult for his nation by drawing out any removal. I won't address presidential aspirations here. Projecting such aspirations on Zaluzhny without evidence is unfair to him. The civil-military relationship between the president and the commander-in-chief is clearly at breaking point and in a place where only one or two things can happen. 1, a significant reconciliation, or 2, someone has to go. In democracies, that someone is always a senior military person. There is an abundance of ambiguity about the next few hours and days in this civil-military crisis in Ukraine. Like many, I'm a huge admirer of General Zaluzhny and the stellar leadership he has provided to the Ukrainian military, but unfortunately, if this speculation continues, he may soon reach a point of no return in his relationship with the president. This is a tragedy for Ukraine. However, such crises are also the nature of civil-military relationships in democracies during peace and war. So yeah, that's what Mick Ryan has to say. I'm not going to pop into that Anne Applebaum article. I'm going to move to something completely different now. But I'm not going to dwell on this too much because the article in question is absolutely behemoth. It's one of these big Euromaidan press deep reads that I think is well worth looking at. It's blood gold, how the Kremlin mercenaries loot Africa to wage war in Ukraine, seizing African gold mines and building smuggling networks. The Kremlin-backed Wagner Group has generated over $2.5 billion to fund Russia's war in Ukraine. But there is a way to close the gap on Wagner's Africa blood gold pipelines. Indeed, Ukraine's special forces are operating in Africa in a number of places, and we've seen footage of them taking out Russian targets, which indicates that they see it as very important do continue that kind of work abroad, that is not a waste. They're not just doing something frivolous abroad when they should be fighting back on the front lines for their nation. Actually, they're taking out key strategic targets that Russian targets that aid the raising of funds to fund the war. And this is so important. So seizing African gold mines, Wagner has generated, as mentioned, $2.5 billion to fund the war. In Central African Republic, for example, Wagner obtained the massive Ndasima gold mine in exchange for backing the authoritarian ruler Touadera. Satellite images show Wagner expanding production at the site worth $2.8 billion. By controlling Sudan's key Al Ibaidia gold processing plant, Wagner became the dominant buyer of unprocessed Sudanese gold and a major smuggler of processed gold. The group potentially smuggled up to $1.9 billion in 2021 alone. Right, it is Sudan where the latest footage has come out showing Ukrainian special forces hitting Russian targets there. So yeah, and in Mali, Wagner pivoted from its usual strategy, instead brokering a reported $10 million monthly security deal with the junta. The payment comes from taxes on the 4 largest Western gold miners there. There is so much going on, and this article is a very big one, looking at a number of the countries where Wagner is operating and showing how that they are basically extracting money from these countries in order to fund the war effort back in Russia. So this is a real challenge for Western nations. It's a real challenge for Ukraine because it's one thing putting sanctions on goods that are official, above board, but there's another trying to stop somewhat more illicit activities taking place a little bit under the radar across the world as a result of proxies, if you like. Not quite the Russian government, although it's looking more that way nowadays since Wagner has been subsumed and Russia appear to be using their own formal mercenary units to do similar things here. So nonetheless, it is a challenge for the West. It's a challenge for Ukraine. I don't know exactly how it will be overcome. Right. Chris Owicki talks in a thread here about the Ivanovets, the Russian corvette that was sunk recently. A blanket of silence has descended in the Russian media around the fate of the corvette Ivanovets, sunk by Ukrainian sea drones on the 1st of February. 32 members of the crew are unofficially reported to have survived the ship's sinking. The Russian Telegram channel that he refers to a lot has published a chronology and location of the attack, which matches very well with the impressive OSINT analysis derived from star positions published by this OSINTer here, the Mojavensis. And I showed you this morning, indicating that the ship was sunk close to Donoslav Lake, where some people thought it was. There were some geolocations to inside that area, but I think it would have been quite difficult to get those 6 Magura V5 drones through there and into the lake. So yeah, latest idea is it was sunk in the position indicated on the screen. According to the channel, the 56-meter-long vessel was caught in a trap 9 kilometers from the entrance to Lake Donoslav, near the village of Okunivka in the Black Sea region. First attack by an unmanned boat on the ship occurred at 3:42, the second at 3:44, and the third attack occurred at 3:47. According to internal data, at 4 o'clock the ship stopped fighting for the survivability of the vessel and began evacuation. And at 4:46 the ship sank. According to official data, the crew of 32 people were evacuated. One of the seriously injured members was hospitalized. At the same time, the full-time crew number is 39 people, according to the Russian Telegram channel. The official Russian state media has been completely silent about the attack, as We Can Explain notes, which is another source called We Can Explain. However, Russian bloggers have been critical of the Russian military for taking what they regard as a wasteful approach towards the use of naval assets in the Black Sea. Two Majors, another source, notes that loss of the Ivanovets and corroborates the VCHK OGPUs, that's that Russian Telegram channel that Chris Owicki refers to a lot, is corroborated by two majors. That's two majors saying, quote, the sailors bravely fought with many enemy unmanned surface vessels and continued to fight for the survivability of the boat, even after one of the drones was blown up close to the side. Like several other bloggers, Rebar thinks the Ivanovets shouldn't have been there. It blames, quote, the human factor when they're thinking of certain responsible persons remained exactly at the same level as before the special military operation. The implication there is no one's learned anything. Quote, and if this continues over and over again after all similar episodes, then it is worth asking a question about the conclusions drawn. End quote. Military informant, another source, suggests that the huge explosion seen in the Ukrainian video of the attack was caused by the detonation of at least one of the ship's P-270 Moskit anti-ship missiles, which is very likely correct. He questions the thinking behind the ship's deployment. Quote, a big question also arises about the feasibility of having relatively small boats of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in the current situation with a full set of anti-ship weapons on board, taking into account the colossal and more than once demonstrated threat of unmanned sea vehicles, as well as a lack of actual targets for such weapons. You know, what are they going to fire anti-ship missiles at? The Ukrainians have no big ships to take out, so you know, don't bother carrying those missiles. They are only going to present more of a threat to yourself if they get detonated. A pro-Russian military expert, Vladislav Shurigin, queries the apparent lack of defenses of or detection of the USVs. Quote, how were Ukrainian naval drones able to break into Donoslav, given that the width of the passage into the lake is less than 400 meters? So this is if the ship was sunk within the lake, but not definitely clear that that's the case. Or was a boat attacked in the outer roadstead? Note, this is what actually this is what actually happened. But then how did it get ambushed by the drones? Why weren't they discovered? And he continues to quote, I will not say that the best means of detecting drones and countering such attacks is air patrolling. It sets my teeth on edge. But after 2 years of war, neither patrol aircraft nor radar patrol balloons appeared. The reason for the official Russian media's silence is not hard to guess, says Krusowicki. As Ian Matveev comments, and he's another person involved in OSINT, quote, to deny or not notice the explosion of the Novocherkassk, that's the other ship that was the other landing ship that was blown up at Feodosia, would be completely absurd. But an attack somewhere at sea, for which there is only night video from the enemy, can be ignored. Moreover, most of the crew of the Ivanovets were apparently saved, so it's easier to hush up the incidents. Interesting. So the idea is that because it didn't, there isn't mobile phone footage of it from a distance like we saw at Feodosia when that ship blew up at the docks, and satellite imagery has shown that to be just a mere shadow of what it once was, and you saw the explosions. This is drone footage that's coming from the Ukrainians that the Russians can generally just ignore. I mean, yes, it's so obvious, but still ignore it, and they do such a good job of ignoring that which is unignorable in other contexts. But you ignore that, pretend it didn't happen, and you generally have your domestic audience in the palm of your hand, and they'll go along with that. Although some of the more savvy military bloggers will obviously not be ignoring it, but the general population in Russia are not going to be up in arms about the loss of this ship, because Russia can successfully pretend it was never really sunk. What do you guys think? That's enough from me today for this extra piece. Thank you for watching. Please take care, and I'll speak to you soon.